Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome. And I want to welcome you. I'm Andy Rich. I'm the Dean of the Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership. And I want to welcome you to the Rick and Susan Goings Conversations in Leadership. We're in for an extraordinary conversation today with Ray Chambers, someone who has made a difference in business, philanthropy, and global health. And let me tell you a little bit about the background for this series. So the Colin Powell School, some of you are our students, we're the School of Social Sciences here at City College. We're also the home to all the public service and leadership development programs. We're the largest student division of the college, 4,000 students, and our mission is to turn the world's most diverse student population into tomorrow's global leaders. And it's a big mission. That's you guys who are going to turn yourselves into those leaders with a determination to be successful, and we're going to do everything in our power to help you. That is a mission that was made for us by our namesake and by our founder, and by the person who was the chairperson of our board for the first 10 years of our existence, General Colin Powell. Some of you may remember him. Some of you were probably born too late to have ever really experienced him. But General Powell was a trailblazer. He was the first Black American to be chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That is the chief military officer in the United States. He was the national security advisor. He was the first Black American to be the US Secretary of State. And he went to City College. He was born here in Harlem. He grew up in the South Bronx. And when it came to college, it was City College or nowhere. He talked about this all the time. And he came here. He was, by his own admissions, not the world's best student, but he found ROTC at City College. And he went on to the greatness that I just described. And when he finished his service to the nation, he came back to City College. And he sat in a room with a group of students, much like those of you who are here today, and he asked you to go around and introduce yourselves. And when he heard your stories, he saw himself in you. And he redevoted himself to City College for really the last 20 years of his life, and helping us build first the Colin Powell Center and then the Colin Powell School, which just celebrated its 10th anniversary. In acting as our leader, one of the things he was proudest to do was to go out around the country and frankly around the world and tell the story of City College, and ultimately the story of the Colin Powell School. And he did this with every friend he had and every friend he made. And he always told his friends, please come, visit us, meet our students, get involved here. And this series, Genesis, is from one of those friendships, a friendship with Rick and Susan Goings. Rick Goings is chairman emeritus of Tupperware Brands. He was chairman of the board of the Boys and Girls Club of America, and got to know General Powell through, I think, both of those roles, but particularly the Boys and Girls Club, where General Powell was also involved. And I think more than once encouraged Rick to make a trip up to City College. When General Powell passed away, Rick and Susan Goings, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, and I talked about what mattered the most to the school, to you guys, our students, but also what mattered the most to General Powell. What was his vision for what we could be accomplishing? And probably right at the top of that list for General Powell was helping to develop you all, not only to be graduates of City College, but to be leaders across every sector in our society and to be leaders in service to society. And this series, which brings some of the folks who have forged those paths in different sectors and in different ways, but almost always coming from behind in some respects, just as General Powell did and just as many of our students do. This series helps chart that path for all of you. It asks our guests how they did it, and it provides lessons that you can then ascribe to. And so I want to start by thanking Rick Goings and Susan Goings for making this series possible. Please join me in thanking them. So another friend that General Powell, I think, told about the Colin Powell School, told about City College, and tried multiple times to get to City College is our guest today, Ray Chambers. Ray Chambers grew up just across the Hudson River in Newark, New Jersey. He is the person that is at the center of the title of today's talk, which is a businessman, a business leader, an entrepreneur, and someone who has been an international leader in global health. He was a friend of General Powell's. And his story, I think, will resonate with many of you, our students, because his story while not in New York City, was just across in Newark, New Jersey, where he grew up as a hometown kid. He went to a school that's very similar to City College, Rutgers, Newark, and he went on to the kind of greatness, frankly, that General Powell went on to. In business, as a philanthropist, as someone who supports causes that matter to him, probably first among many for Ray Chambers is his beloved hometown of Newark, New Jersey, which he has been at the center of rejuvenating, rebuilding, and giving new life to. And then on to having an effect in global politics, global public affairs, particularly around some of the biggest global health challenges that face the world. Malaria, first and foremost, but many others as well. And we're thrilled that he agreed to come and be part of this series. I should say, as a thank you to Ray Chambers, before he's even begun this conversation, that he made a grant to the Colin Powell School now probably about 10 years ago that created our Semester in Washington, D.C. program. I don't know if any of you have participated in it or plan to, but it's an opportunity for our students to get to Washington and have internships, academic experiences, to network, and to find their path to national public service. And if it was not for the support that Mr. Chambers gave to City College and to the Colin Powell School, we wouldn't have it. It's now one of the most competitive programs for our students and one of our most successful. So I thank you in advance of your talk for having made that possible. And I have to say, with some personal bias, I actually started the program because I was living in DC at the time. And so have a close association and a knowledge of every student who participated. Mr. Chambers is going to be interviewed by one of the namesakes of this program, Susan Goings. So Susan Goings, in addition to being married to Rick Goings, is an award-winning television journalist. And a couple of years ago, when I got to know Rick and Susan and General Powell was still alive, I found out about an interview that Susan had done with General Powell. And it was one that was, frankly, blew up on YouTube and had been watched so many times. And when I watched it, I was struck by how she was able to get General Powell to talk about some of the things we rarely hear him talk about and tell stories that he doesn't so easily tell. And when General Powell passed away, and I might note, it's in some ways particularly poignant that we're here today because it was 2 years ago next week that General Powell passed. When General Powell passed, and I sent out a communication to our entire campus community and beyond, it was only the interview that he had done with Susan that I shared with our community. And so when we started this series, I asked Susan if she'd be willing to be the host and the moderator, and she graciously has agreed. And so it's with great pleasure that I introduce to you Susan Goings and Ray Chambers.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you. And thank you, Ray. And welcome, everybody. I'm glad you guys are here. Really nice to see everybody. I know this is not your comfort zone, Ray. You're not, Ray is a very private person, despite his great accomplishments, his success in business. I really appreciate you doing this. And I think right now, today, there's so much turmoil here in the United States and around the world, and you are a person that exemplifies the good in people. And that's what we always have to look for in people, is the good, because you've spent your whole adult life, maybe even in childhood, I don't know, but I want to find out, doing things for other people. You've always thought, how can I help others? How can I make the world a better place? And so I hope that many of us I'm sure we will be inspired by your story and all you've accomplished and all you've done. So thank you in advance for all of that too. But I really want to start with, how did you know Colin? How did you guys initially meet? You have to, microphone? No, just hold it up close to your mouth.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Am I doing it right?
You're doing it right.
Humbled to be in a place named after Colin Powell, who turned out to be my principal role model in my life, and to be here with Rick and Susan Goings and to see Shahara Llewellyn. It's like a welcome home time. So I had gone through a number of things in the philanthropic part of my life. And in 1996, Colin was thinking about running for president of the United States. And he was really gaining some fervor and energy until his wife Alma said, well, you go ahead and I'll be here waiting for you when you get back. That ended Colin's ambitions to run for president. And he wrote, I didn't know him at that point, he said, I'm going to turn my attention to helping inner city youngsters. And I had been at that for 15 years. So I just wrote him a note and said, you could go to school on my mistakes. And he wrote back and invited me to Alexandria to have lunch with him, which was served by the fast food chain Wendy's, which was, at that time, was General Powell's favorite luncheon place. And so we put our heads together and thought about different things over the course of a year. And we talked about the viability and the incredible difference a mentor, a big brother, a big sister can make in the life, especially of an inner city youngster where there's usually a single parent. And so we decided to launch something called the President's Summit for America's Future. We invited every living president, from President Clinton, President Bush, President Ford, President Carter, and Nancy Reagan, to come to Philadelphia and commit to bringing about 2 million more mentors for 2 million children who needed a mentor. And all 5 or 4 presidents and Mrs. Reagan signed that declaration of commitment, and it was 2 million mentors by the year 2000. So everybody had T-shirts, 2 million by 2000. And they signed it, and it was filed into Independence Hall next to the Declaration of Independence. And that was April of '97. And so we began an entity called America's Promise, whose goal was to bring about not only mentors, but a healthy start, safe space, a chance to give back. And Colin was the chairman of the board, and I was the chairman of the executive committee. And he just took that and ran with it. And by mid-1999, we had reached 2 million mentors. And it was his leadership, his energy, his contacts that brought that all about.
Well, you mentioned his leadership. What do you think are the most important qualities of a leader?
Well, there are so many, but since we're talking about Colin, I'll talk about his characteristics as a leader. He was very quiet, self-effacing. He looked into people to see their qualities and characteristics, and he could, by instinct, almost tell who could become yet another leader. He didn't suffer fools, no matter what position you were in the world, and if he didn't agree with your values and how you conducted yourself, you were not part of his life going forward. And he could get into a room for the 5 years that we were working on America's Promise. I went to a number of speeches with him. I never went to one speech where he did not get a standing ovation on the way in and on the way out. And he just brought that leadership quality with him. And one of the characteristics on this President's Summit for America's Future, he was invited to be on the Oprah show. So he asked if I'd fly out to Chicago with him. And we flew out the night before, and he told me many great stories. But the one characteristic of his leadership that has stayed with me every day is that, you know, Ray, when I was a corporal, I had no ambition to become a sergeant. And when I was a sergeant, I was not thinking about when I'll be a lieutenant or a colonel, and so on and so forth. I was happy in what I was doing, with whom I was doing it. And he said, even to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and on to Secretary of State, I never thought about it. And I then thought about so many other presidents and aspiring presidents who decided they wanted to be president when they were 15 years old. And what a contrast to those other presidents and the strength of character and the humility of somebody who could say, when I was something, I never wanted to be something else.
Well, there are different paths, obviously, to attain one's goals. But two things that you said about him, that he wanted to be around people that had like values. I think that's incredibly important. I always used to tell my kids that hang out with people who are at least as good as you are and aspire to be better. And then be happy where you are. Yeah. But it's okay. I mean, when you were a child, what did you think you would grow up to do?
Growing up in Newark, I grew up in the toughest section of Newark. We were tenants in a 4-family house with 3 other houses, so we had 20 kids playing in the same backyard, which I thought was heaven, and I didn't know any different. Looking back, my father never made more than $100 a week, and I had a great time growing up in Newark, and it was a bit challenging. It encouraged people to develop street smarts that I'm sure most of you have, but I didn't have any real aspiration. I was not a great student like Colin Powell, and we're always trying to figure out where we fit in growing up. High school, I'm reminded of that Irene Cara song from Fame. I wonder where I've been, who I am, where do I fit in? And for me, and I'm sure most of you, that defined what was going on in our dialogue with our minds growing up. So I always liked music, and into high school, I wasn't outstanding. I wasn't a great athlete, not a great student. I was just hoping to fit in. Where do I fit in? So I said, maybe if I become a musician, I'll become cool and popular. And my mother purchased me an accordion.
That would make you really cool. But you became a keyboard player, did you ever play piano as well?
I played piano, but I switched to the Hammond B3 organ, which is still the organ the instrument that I like more than any else.
But you had a band, and you guys actually did gigs, and you paid your way through college doing that, right?
Yeah, as soon as college was over at Rutgers Newark in June, we were booked in most of the seedy nightclubs in our country and Canada.
But it afforded you to be able to pay for college.
It did, yeah.
So what advice can you give these students as you sit here? But you really didn't tell me either. When you were a kid, when you were a little boy, did you think you'd be a musician? Is that what you thought you would do?
No, I was a big Yankees fan, and I hope someday I could play for the Yankees. But by the time I was 12 years old, I thought I should focus on the accordion.
How long did you play the accordion?
I played it for a good 6 years before I switched to the other keyboards.
Oh my God. So wait, until you were what age? How old were you?
I must have been 18. One of the problems with playing the accordion, they have bellows, is it would always wrinkle my shirts. So my mother said it was time to switch to a non-wrinkling instrument.
So if you haven't seen the movie Fame, it's a very old movie, but it's a great movie, and the song he's referring to is a really fabulous, inspiring song. Anyway, what advice would you give them? I mean, you come from a very similar background to a lot of students, and you say you weren't a great student, Colin wasn't a great student. School can be hard, and I worked full-time and went to school full-time my last couple of years of college, and there were many times I wanted to quit, but I obviously knew if I wanted to succeed in life, I needed a college degree, at least a bachelor's degree.
Yeah, I relate to that, Susan. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I was in college. There was an opening in the business school in Rutgers, Newark, and that's what gave me the inspiration because there was a slot for me there. But I was still playing in the band and still thought I'd be a musician. And when I got out of college, I got a job with the accounting firm of Price Waterhouse. And my wife was pregnant, and they fired 2/3 of the staff within 6 months. And I was really sweating it. And I survived, and then I said, you better get to work. So I rolled up my sleeves, and I didn't want to be cut in the next round. And I learned everything I could about financial statements, accounting, tax planning, mergers and acquisitions. And while it wasn't anything that I showed any great skill in going up through school, it was almost necessity being the mother of invention. You better be serious if you want to take care of a wife and children. And so I got very good at that, and it was competitive. Competitive because you didn't want to be the next one cut from the staff. And I learned a lot from reading and talking to people about mergers and acquisitions. And so I decided I would leave Price Waterhouse with 2 other fellows, and we'd set up a consulting firm and to advise companies on mergers and acquisitions. So we did, and we became very good at that, and being in the right place at the right time, which may be at many points in your life more important than certain skills. We're in the right place at the right time, and with a knowledge of mergers and acquisitions, we formed a partnership and became one of the most prominent private equity firms in the early 80s.
But you also, at 25, got into the nursing home business.
I did.
And how does a 25-year-old start working in that business?
I had left Price Waterhouse, and we formed this group, got together with some young fellows on Wall Street, and had a financial backer, and we were going to purchase hospitals and nursing homes. And we did. The financial backer backed away, and we had to go through great machinations to justify all the time and effort. We were able to complete the transaction in early '69, and there were 5 of us, 26 years old, sitting around the room and asking, well, now we've got a company with 3,000 stockholders, 3,000 employees, what are we going to do? And we said, well, we have to start with a CEO. And we looked around the room, and the other 4 guys decided, and this is truthful, I looked the most like a CEO, and I became the CEO.
Well, whatever works, right? Well, so at the same time you're building your business, you're also getting involved in philanthropy. And you have Points of Light, you have America's Promise that you talked about. Tell us about the Points of Light. That was with President Bush, right? The first President Bush.
So what actually happened is we had such a great run with our investment banking business that in 1985, 86, I wound up on the Forbes 400 wealthiest Americans list, which, coming from my background, you would think I would have celebrated more than others, but I felt so awkward, so uncomfortable, and my first thought was, what effect will this have on my children who were young? One was a teenager, and I said, this is terrible. So I worked for the next 3 years.
You said this is terrible?
This is absolutely terrible. Worked for the next 3 years to debate with Malcolm Forbes, the publisher of Forbes magazine, to let me off the Forbes 400 list. And in the meantime, I had wandered into the Boys and Girls Clubs of Newark, where I went when I was 11 years old. And I got to know the kids, all minority, and I loved talking to them and their young moms. And no longer did our financial business hold any allure for me. I couldn't wait to get back to the clubs and talk to the next round of youngsters. So while I was still, or my company was Wesray Capital, while I was still active in Wesray, my partner, the former Secretary of the Treasury, Bill Simon, walked into my room and said, "Isn't this great? We're on the Forbes 400 list. We're at the top of Wall Street. You don't look happy." And I said, "I'm not." And he said, "What would it take to make you happy?" I assumed if you had financial independence, success at what you did, family, health, friends, you'd be automatically happy. That wasn't the case. So Bill said, "What would it take to make you happy?" And I said, "If we could lose it all and start it again," which was the wrong thing to say. So he said, "You need a bleeping vacation." So, but I knew at that point that expanding net worth. So I talked Malcolm Forbes into letting me off the list by giving as much money away as quickly as I could. And the year I got off the list, which was 88 or 89, in the front of the magazine, he always wrote a few lines and said, "We've gotten a few more people on the Forbes 400 list," and he listed them. And we lost a few because, you know, their businesses didn't go well. So there's one member that talked me into letting him off the list, and he's decided to devote his capital to inner city children. And I bet his return on capital will be greater than anybody else on that list.
That's interesting that Malcolm Forbes recognized that. Yet he gave you a hard time about getting off the list. Well, what is it about giving back to others? I mean, we all know, I mean, Rick and I are very much like you with regard to we love helping other people, and we know so many people in this room, friends, who feel the same way. But we all know people who also don't do that. The only money they give away is if they might get a tax benefit from it. So what makes some people just naturally want to do that? And was it your family? Was it your mom or your dad that instilled that in you?
No, neither any epiphany. When Bill Simon asked me that question, I knew something was missing in my life. And that hole was not going to be filled in by making billions and billions and more dollars. And just about the same time is when I wandered into the Boys and Girls Clubs of Newark, met their executive director, met the kids, and within 2 years, my wife and I decided to adopt 1,000 of those children and agreed to pay their tuition through college if they stayed on the right track. It just so dominated my thinking, and each problem was horrible that each family was dealing with. But intervening and helping to solve those problems with our team, our staff, all of a sudden I started to feel that hole, that void fill in. And so I closed Wesray in June of '89, put my assets in trust, and for the last 34 years, I've devoted my entire life to helping other people. And not, you know, it would be non-altruistic if I or anybody else did that, or you or Rick, just to feel better. It clearly was the right thing to do, and the response from those that we helped over these last 3.5 decades really affirmed the decision I had made. Now, some of my peers on Wall Street thought I must have had a terminal illness. Why would I give up that at the peak of our game? And so I did seek out teachers. Why did I feel differently, to your question, than others? And I sought out the Dalai Lama and learned quite a bit from him, and Deepak Chopra, and a dozen other teachers. And all of those roads led back to just what we're talking about now. And Deepak taught in the ancient Vedic text that the way to reach what Hindus call samadhi, one of the ways, is to give of yourself, let those relationships go as deeply and as far as they can go, and then get detached from outcome, whether you're ever thanked, whether the people resent your largesse. And that was such a lesson. And to this day, I recognize why that works. Why it doesn't work for so many other people, my guess would be, not being a qualified psychologist, is it's as a result of a certain level of insecurities, and the only way they think they can overcome those insecurities is to make even more money.
I think you're absolutely right about that. But there is also, the more money you make, the more money you can give away to help others.
That's true. And a lot of people have said that to rationalize why they're making more money and buying a 500-foot yacht. But what I've
You
also...
never bought the yacht? No.
What I've also found, Susan, is it's one thing to write a check and help somebody. It's a completely different experience, like with the youngsters in Newark, to roll up your sleeves, engage in their lives, and help turn their lives around. Infinitely more satisfying than writing a big check.
How important is mentoring? I don't know how many of you out here have somebody in your life, whether it's another student or a teacher, a parent, a friend, an adult, hopefully, how important is mentoring?
I think if I were constrained to one solution, one intervention for youth at risk, it would be mentoring. We know that in the Big Brothers and Big Sisters program, when somebody has a big brother or a big sister, within 12 months, they're 50% less likely to abuse alcohol or substances and less likely to drop out of school. You know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to do that math. And in the late 90s, the World Bank had done a calculation. For every youngster in our country who takes the wrong road in life, from damage and destruction to incarceration to recidivism, that youngster cost us as taxpayers $2 million during their lives. When the Points of Light Foundation was announced by President Bush, and he asked me to be the founding chairman, I said I would if we could devote a lot of its work to building the mentors in this country. And at that time, there were 350,000 mentors in our country through Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and all over. And Colin joined with me in '97. Today, we have more than 5 million mentors in our country. And just think how you're using the math from the World Bank study. That's trillions of dollars that the taxpayers could have been saved by virtue of this growth in mentoring and mentors.
And we need more leaders to think that way.
Yeah.
And prevention is the way to go. Also, Malaria No More. This man has started so many a vast array of things. How did you get involved in fighting malaria?
So I was spending the 90s with our scholarship students and building mentoring, became close friends with General Powell. I almost can't say his name without smiling and emotionally. And I built a world-class performing arts center in Newark, then wound up purchasing the New Jersey Nets and the New Jersey Devils, not because I wanted to own any sports teams, to build an arena in Newark that's now called the Prudential Center. And those two facilities, the world-class performing arts center and the Prudential Center for the sports, really spawned the economic and real estate revitalization.
Created a nightlife, right?
It's done so many things. So September 11th came along. Colin was Secretary of State, and he was devastated by September 11th, and all of you who know him would understand that. And they had the World Economic Forum, mostly held in Davos, Switzerland, But that year, in February of '02, it was held in New York City in tribute to all the lives that were lost with September 11th. And Colin spoke, and he said, the only way we can eliminate terrorism is to level the playing field. So I went back and said, what did he mean by that? How would we level the playing field throughout the world? So 3 of our researchers went, and they discovered the Millennium Development Goals, which 194 nations signed on to in Monterrey, Mexico in the year 2000. And they were daunting and ambitious goals: cutting poverty in half, cutting starvation in half, reducing maternal mortality by 2/3, child mortality by 1/2, and eliminating AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. And my staff said, if you accomplish those, that would fulfill what Colin said about leveling the playing field. I said, my gosh, how would we do that? So I got to know the United Nations and what they were doing, and I couldn't, as a business person, see the strategic plan to optimize the likelihood that those goals would be achieved. So I partnered with a Columbia professor, Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, to come up with a new foundation called the Millennium Promise Alliance to help the world achieve the Millennium Development Goals. And we hired McKinsey to write that plan. And Jeff went off to Malawi, came back, and he had photos of children sleeping. They were 3 and 4 years of age. And I said, aren't they cute? He said, you don't understand. They're all in malaria comas, and I bet they all died after I took that photo. I became completely mesmerized by malaria, about which I knew absolutely nothing. And I quickly, and my team, we researched, and 1.2 million children a year were dying of malaria. This was 2004, 2005, all in sub-Saharan Africa, all under the age of 5. And I learned from Jeff Sachs that there are these interventions, but nobody's ever taken it, organized it, and came up with a plan. And I said, you know, can I leave you with the Millennium Villages? I'll never get the photo of those 3 young children out of my mind's eye. And so I became a Malaria 101 student and found out that these insecticide-treated mosquito nets really worked. You can buy them for less than $10 a net. You can squeeze 3 children under a net. The Anopheles mosquito only bites after 10 o'clock at night, and it dies when it lands on the net because of the insecticide, and that disrupts the reproductive cycle of the Anopheles mosquito. So just not knowing any better, I said, well, let's cover Africa with mosquito nets. And of course the response was, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not a scientist. So I partnered with Peter Chernin, who was the president of News Corp, and we said, we'll try and get 1 million mosquito nets out. And I said, Peter, we're gonna have to use every marketing trick in the book, and he's a brilliant marketeer. And so we got on American Idol, because that was owned by News Corp in Fox Corporation. And we got Ryan and Simon to go to Africa, to our villages, sleep under the bed nets, and they came back with videos. And this was the first subject of Idol Gives Back in 2007. And we collected $80 million that night, but more importantly, 55 million people in America became aware of malaria. And so we developed a marketing mantra: $10 buys a bed net, saves a child's life. And children were having bake sales in 4th grade to raise $40 for 4 nets.
Yeah.
And I was asked by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, to be his first special envoy with malaria in 2008, which I agreed to do. And I stayed in that role for 10 years. And I devoted myself completely, mind, body, soul, to eliminating malaria. Bill Gates joined, and we had so many other wonderful partners. And using those marketing tricks, the NBA and Major League Soccer adopted a part of it called Nothing But Nets. And in 10 years, we raised $15 billion. We covered 1.5 billion people in Africa with bed nets, reduced child mortality from malaria by 71%, and saved the lives of 7 million children.
That's remarkable, remarkable. How did you feel when you heard there was malaria here in the United States recently?
No, it's alarming. We've made some advances, led by Bill Gates, so we can now genetically modify the male mosquito so it can fertilize the hive, but the offspring will not reach maturity. So there are a lot of things that technology is helping us with.
Is that being done?
It's being done.
Oh, my
Still in the pilot test phase. But, you know, we eliminated malaria here because it was a major disease, especially in the southeast and during the Panama Canal building. And we used DDT. And then we banned it. And I formed a group in Africa of 45 African heads of state called the African Leaders Malaria Association, Alliance. And I would bring them together twice a year, and they would complain that the United States is not giving enough money. The UN and the president of Uganda, Museveni, would come up every 6 months and say, I know what you're doing, Mr. Chambers. You eliminated malaria in America with DDT, and then you banned it, so we couldn't. And we had that type of interchange going back and forth. And I'm sure if malaria got out of control in the United States, there are ways now that we could deal with it. And we've really made great progress in Africa. We had a major setback with COVID because funding that was going to buy the bed nets and doing the spraying then went to the vaccines and masks, and we're just recovering now from that.
As you've been talking, there are so many thoughts going through my mind, and one of them, Rick and I founded an organization called the World Federation of Youth Clubs, and we have about 400,000 kids every day who go to youth clubs in 44 countries, and we're expanding, and Ray has been helping us with that project. But mentoring is not something that is one of our programs, and that should be one of our top programs. You're absolutely, I mean, thank you for inspiring me. So I would like to hear from y'all. Is there anything that Mr. Chambers has said? Do you have any questions that you would like to ask him? This is quite an opportunity. So, and thank you so much. Thank you. You're delightful. Delightful. They're going to grab a microphone, and does anybody have any questions? I see a microphone in the back. Boy, you guys are quiet. Okay. All right, we have questions in the front row here.
How's your heart?
How are you?
I'm good, and you?
I'm good. I'm good. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Can you hear her? No. No? I hear it making noise, so
Hello?
put a little bit closer to your mouth.
Hello?
You want to trade with me?
Testing, testing.
Oh, it is working. Okay.
It is.
I think so, or you're really loud, one or the other.
I'm not so loud. Hello?
There we go.
Okay. So the question I have, I kind of keep up with what's going on in Africa. And I've been reading that some of the problems now are that the mosquitoes have gotten to the point where they're immune to the chemicals in the nets. And they have outgrown some of the advanced chemicals. So how do you keep upgrading what the nets are treated with so that they still stay effective?
Thank you, Shahara. So almost with any type of pathogen, immunity will develop over time. And we've seen that with bacteria and our early stage antibiotics, and then how we have to move them up. About 5 years ago, different companies began to develop a supplement for the insecticide on the nets. They're more expensive, they're heavier, and we're just now distributing what they call the dual insecticides treated nets. But I think that cycle of life of getting immune will continue. Fortunately, with the medication we use that comes from the Chinese wormwood plant, the parasite hasn't developed immunity to that.
So you guys continually are doing research to try to stay on top of it.
It's an interesting point. Senator Bradley wrote a book 10 years ago that as we increase the strength of our antibiotics, then the bacteria mutate back up to something else. And his closing line was, we are not going to win that war.
And so the point is to try not to take antibiotics if you don't have to, right?
That's this whole antimicrobial issue where certain cleansing agents are no longer effective in disinfecting. But the more we can wean ourselves from antibiotics, especially the most powerful ones, the better we'll be in the long run.
It's all interconnected. We have another question.
Thank you. Well, this is the benefit, too, because I can't recall how many times before you came in the room, I talked to students and I told them how much you had mattered in my life as a mentor to me, because I knew you would be embarrassed if I said it while you were here. So I figured, what the heck, embarrass you anyway? I'll say it again. But for them right now, because General Powell, you were like me. I never called him Colin. He always would say, call me Colin. I said, you know, I was in the Navy. You're general. You'll always be general to me. But you mentioned he wasn't a good student, and I know what his GPA average, and it's a good idea that he was 4.0 in military classes, because I don't think, Andy, he would have graduated without those. But I hear that you weren't a great student, and Susan, you've interviewed Condi Rice here, and Condi and I were both talking one day at a Boys and Girls Club event, and she's brilliant, but like me, she didn't do well on SAT tests, et cetera. So what would your advice be, though, to students here? Because you often hear that the path to success is go to Philip Dandover, get into Yale, go to, well, it is interesting. Then we saw a whole group of them, Gates, Steve Jobs, et cetera, who actually quit school. And they've been phenomenally successful. What kind of career and path advice would you give students here?
Thanks, Rick. I think as a starting point, all of us spend most time talking to ourselves in our minds. And we ask those questions: where have I been? Who am I? Where do I fit in? And that segues into career. What am I going to do in the future? Can I live up to what I believe my parents' expectations are of me, even though you think their expectations are actually greater than what they are? So we have this constant dialogue. Can I find a career that will be rewarding, that I look forward to going to work every day? And in this environment, it's the most challenging and chaotic environment I've ever encountered in my life. From climate change to the downside risk of AI, Russia invading Ukraine, Hamas invading Israel. The only way much like Colin Powell said, you have to level the playing field. That's been ratcheted up now. The only way we're going to face all those problems is to recognize that if the United States put in a set of rules for artificial intelligence, it's not going to do anything unless 193 other countries do the same. So no longer, as we think about our careers, how we go out of college, do I think we can think just about ourselves. We have to think about everybody sitting in this room, many of whom you don't know, and you have to think about the people in Israel, in Gaza, and throughout the world. And somehow, the young people of this world, Gen Z, will have to come up with a solution that we have completely mishandled, and yet it's your future. And I was one of the group that started something called the Council of the Elders with Archbishop Tutu and Nelson Mandela, President Carter, President Mary Robinson. And our first meeting was in Johannesburg about 13 years ago, and Mandela spoke. Just when he started speaking, we all cried. There wasn't a dry eye in the place. And he spoke in such an inspirational way. And he kept using this word, Ubuntu. And I said, I've never heard that word. And then Archbishop Tutu spoke, and he used the word Ubuntu. I said, I've got to find out what that means. I didn't have the nerve to ask Nelson Mandela, but I asked Archbishop Tutu. And he said it's a tribal word in South Africa, and it means, I am because you are. And the best advice I could give all of you is to recognize you will get nowhere on your own. I am because you are.
That is beautiful. That is wonderful. Andy, how if the students in this room want a mentor but don't have one, is there any program on campus that can help them find somebody?
There is, and in fact, I think we have a director of mentoring and alumni relations in the Colin Powell School, Cynthia Gutierrez, who I think was here earlier, and I don't know if she's here now. But if you haven't yet met Cynthia, or if you're interested in mentoring, we have a robust set of programs that make this possible. And we would welcome students to sign up. So we'll be sending out information, including the recording of this event, and we'll include information about mentoring in it.
Yeah, I think that would be incredibly helpful. I mean, you look at the successful people in this room, the adults that are in the room, and I think everybody here had a mentor. Other than Colin Powell, did you have another mentor?
There was a wonderful man that I had met before I met Colin Powell. He was co-chairman of Goldman Sachs and Assistant Secretary of State, and his name was John Whitehead. And he was an incredible mentor in my life, and completely different than Colin. And one of the great things about being aware is to find something that you can learn from almost anybody. I learned more from the kids in Newark than I learned from any other source in my life.
And I would like to encourage any of you, if you have any free time, go to the local Boys and Girls Club here, and there are many of them in New York and in New Jersey, and volunteer. It will change your life, much like all of us that have been involved in the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, which is a phenomenal organization. So, well, Ray, thank you. Are there any other questions before we say thank you? Oh, we have one right back here.
Hi, my name is Sage Mochia. I am part of the Moynihan Undergraduate Fellowship. And you talked a little bit about incarceration, and I wanted to know, in addition to the Boys and Girls Club, what else do you think we could be doing as public schools to be, limiting the school to prison pipeline? Do you think that the implementation of school resource officers are actually helpful? Do you think that we should have more rehabilitation programs to be filtering people out of the incarceration system? And do you think it's ever too late to have a mentor? Thank you for coming.
Great question.
Thanks, Sage. I have a 14-year-old granddaughter named Sage. Those are great questions. I've stayed very much involved in Newark, never left it, despite what we've done in Africa and elsewhere. And I went to the toughest high school in Newark. It's called Westside High School. And about 20 years ago, I adopted Westside High School. And have worked with, has about 600 students, 9th through 12th grade. The challenges that we faced 15 years ago, we're facing in an even greater way. And the devastating effect of COVID on the loss of learning is something we've never encountered before. We have mentors for the students. That may be the single biggest difference. We're teaching them all careers as they go through high school. And Rutgers Newark, my alma mater, has a business school, and it has the third best supply chain business program of all business schools in the country. We now have Rutgers, the students and the teachers, starting to teach supply chain, which is a wide range of business interventions, including blockchain technology. So beginning in 9th grade in Westside High School, you have the chance to start to learn supply chain. Last year, there were 375,000 jobs available for college graduates with supply chain knowledge. Only 80,000 in the United States graduated with that. So I think the single best thing we've done, beside mentoring and supporting the principal, the teachers, the goal at Westside High School now is to make sure that every graduate, even those that don't go on to college, are able to earn a living wage. And incarceration has affected many of the 1,000 youngsters that we started with in Newark on both sides. We had a number of people killed, as well as those who did commit murder. And, early pregnancies. Colin Powell recognized 25 years ago that the breakdown of the community and the breakdown of the family unit was the root cause of what's happening in our inner city communities. And what we're seeing in Newark, first the Haitian boat people came in, and those students outperformed our 8th-generation inner city kids. And in the last 2 years at Westside High School, we have about 100 Nigerian students who I'm sure came here without all the proper papers, and they are outperforming, and the Nigerian families are staying together, as did the Haitian families. So hearkening back to what General Powell had said, if there's any way we can restore the family unit, and beyond that, the neighborhood unit, the best substitute for the family unit is a mentor. And just, I don't want to go on too long, but with our first class, it was READY class, rigorous educational assistance for deserving youth. And we started with 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and 8-year-olds. And they felt they were special because they were part of this program. One day, the Board of Trustees of the program went to visit the first 27 children, and they recited their READY pledge, Pledge of America, dressed up nicely. And the teacher said, children, do any of you want to ask the Board of Trustees anything? And this one handsome young man, his name is Atif, stepped forward and said, I'd like to compliment the board on how nice they look today. I said, wait, time out. He became a member of our family. He's now 45 years old, and he's still with us. So our family, through mentoring, became his family. And that made such a difference in his life. So mentoring, earning a living wage, and everybody in the community doing everything possible. And how can we, successful people with our yachts, live peacefully and comfortably in our McMansions or whatever people have, and we pull the bridge up after we go home at night and cross the moat, knowing there are so many inner city youngsters and rural youngsters that are completely disconnected from the rest of this world. And it's back to Ubuntu. We have to live. I am because you are. Also, one of the Dalai Lama's monks, his name is Mato Ricard, taught us that the most direct route to happiness is in service to others.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you so much. Sage, you mentioned about incarceration. I don't know if you have a loved one or a family member or a friend, but for me, I don't think it's ever, you'd never give up. I don't think it's too late to have a mentor as an adult. So I don't know how you feel about that, but.
No, and it's been happening over decades. When we had so many carpenters, there were always the laborers and the apprentices. That was a mentoring relationship. In many places, even in Africa, a woman, a doula, a midwife, mentors a pregnant young woman. So there are all these needs and all these openings. It's never too late. And in the city of Newark, 63% of pregnant women seek prenatal care. In Liberia, it's 64%.
As I said that to you, I've been to Al-Anon meetings before, and they tell you to give up. And so I just said something that I wasn't taught. So, but I think, from the heart, it's difficult sometimes to do that. But thank you for your question. Anybody else have a question? One right here, in the second row. And I'm not sure how we're doing on time, Andy. We're good? Okay.
Hello, my name is Noor. Is this on?
Hi, Nora.
I'm also a Moynihan Fellow, so, just like Sage. And I was wondering, you mentioned a lot of people in your career in philanthropy who you partnered with in order to tackle a lot of these issues that you were talking about, such as Professor Jeffrey Sachs and, of course, General Powell. I was wondering if you could tell us more about how important were these relationships when it came to solving these issues, and do you think you could have done it without them?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just thinking about the answer. I'm a huge believer in collective intelligence, but going beyond intelligence, if you can get 5 people working on malaria with you, you're going to come up with more ideas, more solutions, and they'll know some people who can help. So partnerships are really effective. And I've built at least 12 public-private partnerships. And a lot of the work we're doing in Africa that stemmed from malaria is a combination of the private sector with the public sector. They learn so much from each other. And I will never undertake anything alone. I will look for a partner. And what we found from the study of collective intelligence, it started with a jar of jelly beans on the conference room table, and one person, the CEO, guessed there were 600 jelly beans in that jar. Then they brought in 10 people, and they said there are 520. Then they brought in 10 most diverse people, and they said there were 505. There were 500 jelly beans in that jar. So you can go so much further. Well, that was that African proverb about you can get there faster alone, but you can get there more successfully with others. And I never do anything without partners. And having a partner like Colin Powell for America's Promise, he had experiences and knowledge and a network of contacts that I couldn't even think about. And I had my experience on the ground in Newark and some of the things we were doing. Clearly a case of 1 + 1 equaling more than 2. And the more we can do together, going back to, we're not going to solve the downside risks of AI, climate change on our own, no matter how bright we think we are. Reach out, be a mentor, learn something from your mentee, and reach out to other people who are looking for that most direct route to happiness, being in service to others.
Thank you for that question. That was great. My last question, we have dozens of wars going on around the world right now, not just the two we hear the most about in the last week and months. We have a presidential election coming up. What leadership qualities should we be looking for in our next president?
Sure, I was hoping we wouldn't get into politics, but
Well, you can pass if you want.
no, I won't pass. So I've said many times, I think the most effective and successful president of our country could have been General Colin Powell. Yes. And thinking about all those other folks that wanted to be something when they were teenagers, what Colin wanted to do was do something. He didn't want to be a general when he was a private or a lieutenant. He wanted to do something. And he gave an example of mentoring. He said, you know, we get these fresh recruits, they're sassy, they're making noises, we shave their heads. Within 30 days, the only thing they're thinking about is pleasing their drill sergeant. But Colin had that humility. He would listen. You'd get into a room. He would never start the conversation by saying, I know this, I know that. And he would build bridges across political parties. You know, Colin was a Republican. We did the President's Summit for America's Future with Bill Clinton when he was in office. And his values, I would say if we sat down and we all passed around a pad, and what values do we think, based on what we know of Colin Powell, he had, we would have the best compendium of the qualities of a leadership needed to be president.
I wholeheartedly agree. Thank you. Beautiful answer. And thank you so much for joining us. It really means a lot.
Thank you all
to us.
very much. Thank you. Thank you.
And I know Colin is happy you're here. Appreciate it this morning. Sorry about the last question.
No.